In 1785, a sealed parchment was removed from a lodge vault in Ingolstadt. The official record states it was incinerated along with 9 other documents deemed too dangerous for any initiate below the 33rd degree to read. But the Bavarian State Archives contain a separate inventory, written in a different hand, that lists 10 scrolls as seized and 1 as retained. The retained scroll was not catalogued with the others. It was logged under a single word, repeating. The archivist who recorded it in 1803 added a marginal note in Latin that translates to, "The wheel turns again." He was found dead in his studies 6 weeks later. The cause of death was recorded as heart failure. He was 34 years old and had no prior cardiac condition. If you have ever read a declassified file and noticed that the most important lines were blacked out, while trivial details remained legible, you understand the exact shape of this wall. The system buries what it fears, and what it feared in 1785 was not a political conspiracy. It was a historical claim so precise, so testable, that if confirmed, it would render every official timeline obsolete. The Lodge minutes from July 1782 name 7 bloodlines that funded the original Illuminati charter. Those same minutes include a single redacted line that the council allowed no secretary to read aloud. The line described a document that had been in the bloodline's possession since the Council of Trent, not a charter, not a constitution. A prophecy disguised as a calendar. Here is what changes everything. The scroll does not predict vague future upheavals. It names specific years in a repeating pattern of exactly 499 years and 9 months. It claims that human history, at least the version controlled by initiated councils, operates on a fixed temporal loop. The founding of every major institution, every reset of the monetary system, every reconfiguration of borders aligns with a date on that scroll. The first recorded iteration in the scroll begins in the year 1054. That year marks the formal split between the Eastern and Western churches, an event that redrew the spiritual map of Europe. The second iteration begins in 1553, the year the Peace of Augsburg established the principle that a ruler's religion determined his region's religion, effectively dividing Germany into confessional blocks that persist to this day. The third iteration begins in 2052. According to the scroll, we are currently in the final decade of the third cycle. The document states that every cycle ends with a consolidation event, a collapse of the old order, and the installation of a new governing council under the same bloodline names. It names those names. They are not fictional. The single candle on the researcher's desk sputters as the air thickens with decayed paper and cold stone condensation. The parchment is cracked along the fold lines and the ink has oxidized to a deep rust color, but the script is still legible. It was written in a cipher that matches the outer ring of the Voynich manuscript, a code that academic cryptography has never broken. The scroll's cipher was broken in 1947 by a British intelligence officer who never published his findings. That officer's name was John Harrison. He worked for MI5's occult desk, a unit that officially never existed. His private notes, declassified in 2004, contain a full transcription of the scroll. He wrote in his diary that the cipher took him 14 months to crack, and that when he finished, he sat in silence for 3 hours. He then requested a transfer to a non-analytical role. The request was granted within the week. Harrison's transcription reveals that the scroll contains not only a timeline, but a mechanism. It describes how the bloodlines maintain continuity across the cycles by controlling 3 specific nodes: the monetary system, the religious hierarchy, and the archival record. It states that every 500 years, the councils convene in a location that shifts geographically with each cycle. The first council convened in Constantinople. The second convened in Augsburg. The third convened in Washington, D.C. The date of the Washington convening is recorded as 1953, the same year the Federal Reserve was restructured under the Eisenhower administration. The scroll states that the council remained in session for 3 days and that during that time a new monetary framework was ratified. 2 years later, the Bretton Woods system was formally abandoned and the global currency grid was remade. If you have ever watched the news and felt that the pieces do not add up, that the same pattern of crisis, monetary expansion, and institutional overhaul repeats every few decades, you are not imagining it. The scroll claims that this is not chaos. It is designed. The cycle is not a metaphor. It is a schedule. The vault where the scroll is currently held has been moved 3 times since 1785. The FOIA request filed in 2019 returned a heavily redacted report that confirmed the scroll's existence but listed its location as classified. The report referred to the document by its German name, which translates to the repeating parchment. It noted that the document was considered operationally sensitive and recommended against further declassification. You have just seen the truth behind the repeating parchment, a document confirmed to exist, yet officially sealed away as operationally sensitive. The pattern is not a theory. It is an inventory of control that repeats every 500 years. Subscribe to continue tracking the locations, the bloodlines, and the schedules the councils never meant for you to see. In the comments, type inventory if you recognize the dates in your own timeline. The smell of copper and old ink rises as the manuscript is unrolled in the archive's temperature-controlled room. The wax seals are intact but brittle. The ribbon that binds the scroll is woven with gold thread, a detail that Harrison noted in his transcription as matching the ceremonial cords used in the highest degree of the Scottish rite. The ribbon pattern appears in no other known document. The genealogical registers from the parish archives in Frankfurt list the same 7 bloodline names uninterrupted from 1785 to 1945. After 1945, 3 of the names disappear from public record. Harrison's notes suggest they changed their surnames and relocated to South America. The scroll names those new surnames. A cross-reference with property records in Argentina confirms that 4 families acquired large estates in Buenos Aires province between 1946 and 1950. This is the detail most researchers never saw. The scroll does not predict doom. It predicts consolidation. It states that the cycle's end will not be marked by destruction, but by absorption, that the existing institutions will not be demolished, but hollowed out and refilled with new loyalties. It describes a process called the folding, in which the outer layers of the system collapse inward, and the inner council reemerges with a new public face. Harrison wrote in his notes that the folding had already occurred twice in recorded history, and that each time the population did not notice because the daily routines remained unchanged. The calendar changed, the currency changed, the official history changed, but the streets looked the same, the markets operated, and the churches held services. The scroll claims that the folding is invisible by design. Now here's the detail that the researchers tried to bury. The scroll includes a countdown mechanism based on astronomical alignment. It specifies that the cycle resets when Jupiter and Saturn complete a specific conjunction pattern, visible only from a single longitude. The next such conjunction occurs in December of 2027. The longitude corresponds to the meridian of Washington, D.C. Declassified MI5 files from 1946 confirm that post-war Masonic continuity programs were established in coordination with the Office of Strategic Services. The programs were designed to preserve the Lodge's leadership structures through the transition from the British to the American sphere of influence. The names listed in those programs match the names in Harrison's transcription. The programs were officially dissolved in 1965. Unofficially, they continued under a different designation. Your fingers trace the cracked leather binding of the archival copy. The wax seal crumbles at your touch. Beneath it, a dark stain spreads across the parchment. The archivist in 1797 noted in the margin that the stain was organic, that it tested positive for human blood. He did not speculate on its origin. He simply recorded the observation and moved to the next entry. At what point did this stop sounding like history and start sounding like now? Write the moment in the comments. Because the scroll's third cycle began in 2052, and we are currently in the final phase of that cycle, meaning that the folding is not approaching. It is unfolding. The councils have already convened. The monetary grid has already been restructured. The religious hierarchy has already been reorganized quietly through a series of resignations and appointments that received minimal press coverage. The scroll names the location of the current council's permanent vault. It is listed on the deed of a building in Lower Manhattan, a structure built in 1973 with no windows on the first 3 floors. The building is owned by a shell corporation registered in Delaware. The corporation's board members are listed as law firms that merge and rename every 3 years, making the ownership chain effectively untraceable. Architectural blueprints from the Austrian Engineering Museum show underground structures built in 1873 that match the scroll's description of a vault designed to survive bombardment. The blueprints include a ventilation shaft and a water supply, suggesting the chamber was meant to be occupied for extended periods. The additions dated 2004 include a data center and a satellite uplink. The blueprints were obtained through a public records request from a researcher whose identity was later scrubbed from the request log. What the next page says, the council redacted. Harrison's transcription ends mid-sentence. The final entry is a single word in German, Zusammenbruch, collapse. The scroll does not say when. It only says that the previous 2 cycles ended in collapse and that the third cycle will as well. Harrison wrote in his diary that he believed the collapse was not a physical event, but an administrative one. a dissolution of the current public-facing institutions, followed by a quiet reconstitution under new names. The codex lists the 47th page. You see the ink faded gilt gold against the aged parchment. The gold catches the light and seems to move as your angle shifts. The stone floor beneath you vibrates faintly as a subway train passes somewhere below the archive. The vibration rattles a loose seal on a nearby cabinet. The sound is metallic and hollow. It reminds you that this document exists in a building built above a transit network that was constructed after the scroll was written. The network was planned in 1900. Construction began in 1904. By then, the scroll had already been in the vault for 119 years. If the document is accurate, that countdown has already started. You are not reading about history. You are reading an instruction manual that is still in use. The councils did not disband. They restructured. The bloodlines did not die out. They changed names. The vault did not open. It was reinforced. And the scroll that was supposed to have been burned in 1785 is still intact, still readable, still waiting for someone to ask the right question. The original codex is still under lock in Frankfurt. The library catalog lists it as destroyed. The archival staff know the truth, but their silence was sworn. The few who have seen it since Harrison describe it differently in every account. One called it a history. One called it a map. One called it a warning. None of them was permitted to publish what they saw. Drop your answer in the comments. Will you let them keep the full transcription hidden, or do you want to see what the redacted page actually says in the next video? The choice is not about curiosity. It is about whether you believe that a document written in the 18th century can accurately describe a world you already recognize. This is the moment where the document stops being a curiosity and becomes a mirror. If that scroll predicted a world you already live in, then the remaining pages are not history. They are a schedule. Subscribe to trace the bloodlines from Frankfurt to Vienna with us, because the next chapter names the names the public records confirm, but the council hopes you ignore. And when you do, drop this in the comments. The scroll is still running. That phrase alone tells us you understand what is at stake. In the next chapter, we trace the bloodlines from Frankfurt to Vienna and the names you will recognize from corporate boards, political dynasties, and philanthropic foundations. The scroll names them all. The public records confirm them all. The question is whether you are ready to see the pattern clearly. You now know where the system was designed. The question no one has answered yet is, who is running it now? The scroll provides one clue. It states that the current council's chairman is always the eldest male descendant of the bloodline that held the original charter. That bloodline has a surname you have heard. The name appears on the founding documents of an institution that controls more capital than most nations. The scroll does not name the institution. It names the family. You can look it up yourself. The information is not classified. It is simply not connected. The bloodline Harrison identified as the current holder of the chairmanship traces its documented wealth to a single transaction in 1799. That year, the financier from the Frankfurt Lodge purchased a controlling interest in a British trading company that would later become a central node in the global opium trade. The profits from that trade funded the establishment of 3 universities, 2 central banks, and the first transatlantic cable. The scroll mentions this financier by name and notes that his descendants would hold the council's rotating chairmanship for exactly 3 cycles before passing it to a collateral branch. The collateral branch is currently represented by a family you have seen in the financial press. Their foundation issues grants to think tanks that produce the economic models governments use to justify monetary expansion. The scroll describes this arrangement with chilling precision. It states that the council funds the research that produces the rationale for the policies the council has already decided to implement. The research is genuine. The data is real. The conclusions are predetermined. Harrison's notes contain a diagram of this feedback loop. He labeled it the permission machine. The machine works by funding a wide range of academic institutions, some of which produce findings that contradict the council's agenda. Those findings are quietly shelved. The findings that align with the agenda are promoted through a network of journalists, policy advisors, and conference speakers who share common educational history. The scroll claims that the permission machine has never failed to produce the desired public consensus within a 3-year window. The window for the current cycle began in 2020. The consensus targets listed in the scroll include the restructuring of global reserve currency allocations, the integration of digital identification systems into central banking infrastructure, and the formalization of a supranational dispute resolution body that supersedes national courts. Each of these targets has moved from fringe speculation to mainstream policy discussion within that 3-year window. The scroll predicted this exact sequence. A researcher at the University of Basel, working with Harrison's declassified notes, mapped the policy adoption rates against the scroll's timeline in 2022. She found that every major financial restructuring since 1944 has occurred within 18 months of the date predicted in the transcription. Her paper was accepted for publication in a peer-reviewed journal. Before the issue went to press, the journal's editorial board withdrew the article, citing concerns about the reliability of the source material. The journal later published a retraction that did not specify factual errors. The scroll includes a mechanism for maintaining continuity across the cycles that does not rely on institutional memory alone. It describes a training program for initiates that begins in adolescence and spans 12 years. The curriculum includes monetary history, ritual protocol, cryptographic methods, and a practice the scroll calls temporal detachment, a cognitive framework that allows the initiate to view current events as temporary configurations of permanent patterns. Graduates of this program serve as the Council's administrative core. The genealogical registers from Frankfurt show that between 1830 and 1940, at least one child from each of the 7 bloodlines was enrolled in a boarding school in Switzerland whose curriculum was never formally published. The school's alumni include central bankers, intelligence directors, and the founders of 3 major public relations firms. The school closed in 1954. Its records were transferred to a private archive in Zurich that requires family lineage verification for access. Harrison attempted to gain access to that archive in 1948. His request was denied. He noted in his diary that the denial letter was signed by a man whose surname matched one of the bloodlines and who served simultaneously on the boards of 2 central banks. Harrison added a margin note that read, "The wall has no gaps. It is not a wall. It is a circle." The circle Harrison described is not a metaphor. It is an operational structure documented in the Council's own procedural manuals, copies of which were seized by Allied forces in 1945 and deposited in the Bundesarchiv. Those manuals outline a decision-making hierarchy that mimics a corporate board but operates under oath-bound secrecy, with penalties that include asset forfeiture, genealogical expulsion, and in the most severe cases, physical removal. The manuals list the 7 bloodlines as permanent voting members and designate an 8th seat that rotates every generation among approved external families. The external families are not initiates. They are partners, bound by commercial interest rather than ritual obligation. The scroll names 3 of these families explicitly and notes that their cooperation is secured through a mechanism the document calls mutual vulnerability, meaning that each external family possesses damaging information about the others, ensuring that no single member can defect without bringing the entire structure down. This arrangement has never been breached in recorded history. Harrison's notes include a sketch of the council chamber as described to him by an anonymous source within the German Masonic Restoration movement. The chamber contains a circular table divided into 9 segments, 1 for each bloodline, 1 for the rotating external seat, and the central segment left empty. On the empty segment rests a single object, a sealed copper box containing a copy of the scroll itself. The box is opened only at the beginning of each cycle, and its contents are read aloud by the chairman. The current cycle began in 2052, meaning the box was opened and read 2 years ago. The content of that reading is not known, but Harrison's transcription ends with a notation that the final section of the scroll, the one that was redacted in the Council's own inventory, describes a fail-safe mechanism. The mechanism is triggered if the scroll's predictions are deliberately suppressed or if the Council fails to convene at the designated interval. Harrison wrote that the failsafe involved the release of a secondary document stored in a separate location, one that contains instructions for dissolving the Council's authority and transferring control to a pre-selected successor body. The location of that secondary document is not in Harrison's notes. He wrote that he believed it was held by a family not listed among the 7 bloodlines, a family that served as the scroll's independent custodian. He identified this family through a single clue, a property deed from 1788 that transferred a plot of land in the Austrian Alps to a woman whose surname appears nowhere else in the bloodline records. The deed was witnessed by a notary who later became the Grand Master of a lodge in Vienna that was forcibly dissolved by the Gestapo in 1938. The land in question was surveyed in 2009 by a geological team funded by the University of Innsbruck. The team discovered an underground chamber carved into the limestone, sealed with a steel door that predated the Industrial Revolution. The chamber was empty. The team's report noted signs that the contents had been removed within the previous 50 years, including fresh tool marks on the stone floor and traces of wax from a seal that had been broken and removed. The report was classified by the Austrian Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution and has never been publicly released. A former employee of that office provided a summary of the report to a journalist in 2015 under condition of anonymity. The summary stated that the chamber contained a stone plinth with a single carved symbol matching a glyph found in the Voynich manuscript's outer ring, the same cipher used in the scroll. The journalist published the summary in a magazine that ceased publication 6 months later. The journalist died of a heart attack at the age of 42. He had no prior cardiac condition. The pattern of sudden death among those who have come close to the scroll's contents is documented in Harrison's notes. He listed 14 individuals who died under unexplained circumstances between 1803 and 1947, all of whom had either accessed the scroll or corresponded with someone who had. The causes of death include heart failure, stroke, drowning, a fall from a height, and a single case of suicide by poison. Harrison noted that none of the deaths were investigated beyond a superficial inquest, and that the coroners involved in each case shared a Masonic affiliation. 14 deaths, each one closed with a Masonic coroner's signature. You are now inside the same trail that Harrison mapped. Subscribe to continue following the documented disappearances and sealed reports because the archive is not finished releasing its holdings. Leave a comment with the word 14 if you noticed what Harrison's list implies about institutional silence. Harrison's list ends in 1947 because after that year, no researcher publicly claimed to have seen the scroll. The document effectively disappeared from the archival record, surviving only in the inventory of the Bavarian State Archives and in Harrison's own transcription, which was declassified in 2004 and immediately reclassified under a different exemption. The reclassification was challenged by a Freedom of Information organization in 2006. The challenge was denied on the grounds that the document contained information that could be used to circumvent financial regulatory frameworks. The legal language is precise. It does not say the scroll contains a prediction. It says the scroll contains information that could be used to circumvent financial regulatory frameworks, which is a direct admission that the scroll describes a mechanism for manipulating markets, not just a record of past events. The mechanism is actionable. It is not symbolic. A derivatives trader in London, whose name has not been published, obtained a copy of Harrison's transcription through a FOIA request in 2008. He used the cycle dates to model currency fluctuations and found that the scroll's predicted inflection points correlated with the largest single-day shifts in the dollar-euro exchange rate over a 40-year period. He shared his findings with 2 colleagues. One of them reported the conversation to the Financial Conduct Authority. The trader was investigated but not charged. He was, however, placed on a watch list that prevented him from trading major currency pairs for the following 5 years. The trader's model was later replicated by a graduate student at the London School of Economics who had no knowledge of the scroll. She independently arrived at the same cycle dates by analyzing the founding charters of central banks and cross-referencing them with currency crises. Her paper was published in a minor journal and received no citations. She abandoned the research after being denied tenure, a decision she later attributed to pressure from the department chair, who had previously served as an advisor to the Bank of England. The scroll's reach extends beyond finance into the structure of religious authority. Harrison's transcription includes a section that describes the selection process for the leader of the Roman Catholic Church, a process the scroll claims has been influenced by the Council since the Council of Trent. The scroll states that the council maintains a list of candidates for the papacy who have been vetted for their willingness to cooperate with the cycle's requirements. The list is updated every 20 years and is delivered to a cardinal who serves as the council's liaison within the Vatican. Harrison names the cardinal who held this role in 1946. He was Italian. He died in 1957 under circumstances described as natural. The scroll further claims that every significant schism in the Christian church occurred in the same years as the cycle's inflection points, serving to fragment institutional authority and prevent the emergence of a unified religious opposition to the council's agenda. The Great Schism of 1054 falls exactly at the beginning of the first cycle. The Protestant Reformation, which began with Luther's 95 Theses in 1517, reached its political climax at the Peace of Augsburg in 1555, the start of the second cycle. The scroll predicts that the third cycle will see a similar fragmentation within a non-Christian tradition, specifically naming a branch of Islam that has experienced internal conflict since 2014. Harrison noted that the scroll's author or authors possessed a detailed understanding of global religious demographics that would have been impossible to compile without an extensive intelligence network in the 18th century. The scroll names missionary orders, trade routes, and diplomatic channels that align perfectly with known Jesuit communications networks from the period. The Jesuits were formally suppressed in 1773, 12 years before the scroll was seized in Ingolstadt, but their intelligence apparatus continued operating under different auspices. The scroll was likely written by someone with access to that network. A fragment of the scroll's original parchment was subjected to radiocarbon dating in 2005 by a laboratory in Oxford that was unaware of the document's provenance. The results placed the parchment's production between 1690 and 1730, a range that predates the formal founding of the Illuminati in 1776. This means the scroll existed before the organization that was created to safeguard it. The organization was not the author of the document. The document was the reason for the organization's existence. This inversion of the standard historical narrative changes the meaning of everything that followed. The Bavarian government did not suppress the Illuminati because it feared a secret society. It suppressed the Illuminati because the society possessed a document whose claims could not be allowed to circulate. The burning of the documents in 1785 was not a book burning. It was a containment operation. The scroll survived because it was the only document that could not be replaced.